Stern has become such a wussified sycophant, he doesn't realize that telling Kamala that he'd vote for a wall is telling her that he knows she's as dumb as one. I mean, not to mention, Trump is the wall candidate, not Cackle's McKnee pads. Stern got even more pathetic, wondering how she doesn't nap.
That brings me to Howard Stern and his interview of Kamala Harris, where he put the cards on the table about how he was feeling, in particular about her latest media tour, which did not include Saturday Night Live, but she was lampooned on it a little. A lampoon may be too strong, but she was mocked, as they usually do, just to Republicans. Take a listen.
This is what keeps me up at night. I don't understand how my fellow Americans, I don't even understand how this election is close. And yes, I'm voting for you, but I would also vote for that wall over there.
Howard Stern once ruled the airwaves as the untouchable king of shock radio. But when Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly turned their sights on him, the empire he built was ripped apart before a live audience. The man who once terrified regulators and mocked the powerful was suddenly exposed as a fragile shadow of his former self. Greg Gutfeld entered with that trademark smirk, the kind that promised he was about to drop a bomb no one could ignore. This wasn't about politics or late-night gossip. This was a takedown aimed straight at Howard Stern, the so-called king of all media, who had spent decades branding himself as rebellion incarnate. Greg didn't just roast Stern. He dragged him through the timeline of his own career.
This is what keeps me up at night. I don't understand how my fellow Americans, I don't even understand how this election is close. And yes, I'm voting for you, but I would also vote for that wall over there. When you said you don't nap, I get it, because like what you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country. Even when I watch them on Saturday Night Live with the, where they have Maya Rudolph playing you, I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of.
Like a prosecutor showing evidence in court. He reminded everyone that Stern wasn't always this polished, apologetic figure. No, he was once a chaos machine, the guy who mocked sacred cows and thrived on outrage. With biting sarcasm, Greg painted the transformation. Watching Howard Stern now, he joked, is like discovering your favorite punk rocker opened a spa in the Hamptons that sells organic tea and lectures on balance. The crowd couldn't help but laugh because the image was painfully true. Howard Stern, the man who once hurled insults at politicians, celebrities, and cultural taboos, now sips green juice while apologizing for the very jokes that built his empire. Greg didn't just highlight the hypocrisy, he made it sting with every punchline. Then Greg delivered the knockout line. Stern didn't just sell out, he sold the booth, the mic, the headphones, and threw in his spine as a bonus. The words hung in the air like a gavel strike, reminding everyone just how far the mighty had fallen. He compared old Stern to a wrecking ball that smashed through hypocrisy, and new Stern to a timid interpretive dancer who only moves after checking with legal. The audience erupted because the contrast was undeniable. Greg pointed out the irony. Stern now preaches growth and tolerance, yet his archives are filled with content so outrageous it makes his current persona look like a ghost battling his own past. The hypocrisy was too glaring to ignore. Look at this crop of woke comedians, Greg laughed. Stern, Jimmy Kimmel, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, all of them wore blackface, and now they lecture us about morality.
Period, while listening to it. You should hear what keeps him up at night. She also appeared on Howard Stern, where he said he'd even vote for a wall over Trump. Harris replied, "I'm not a wall, but I am plastered."
The hypocrisy wasn't just Stern's, it was an entire circle of elites exposed in real time. For decades, Stern was the loudest, crudest, most unapologetic voice on radio. But Greg reminded everyone that once the money rolled in and celebrity friendships piled up, the rebel turned into the very thing he used to mock: an elite insider begging for approval. The man who once tossed food at strippers in wild stunts now acts like the nation's therapist, whispering his way through celebrity interviews as if honesty has become too dangerous. The rebellion didn't evolve, it disappeared. Greg mocked the new Stern studio too, describing it as a haunted mansion of relevance, dim and gloomy, with a voice that now sounds like a luxury car commercial. The image wasn't just funny, it was haunting, because it felt so true. He didn't age, Greg explained. He faded. What was once raw fire had become a wax statue version of rebellion, carefully preserved in hair dye and nostalgia. Stern hadn't evolved into something greater. He had melted into something weaker. Then Greg zeroed in on Stern's audience shift. He joked that the most shocking thing wasn't the content. It was how anyone who remembered 1990s Stern could still listen today without cringing in embarrassment. The crowd roared with laughter because the truth hurt. The so-called king of all media now spends more time lamenting the culture than challenging it, and Greg declared it both hilarious and tragic, because rebellion without edge isn't rebellion at all. It's theater.
But it is incredibly brave to take this stance after you've made $300, $400 million not being woke, right? Loving Donald Trump, exploiting the mentally ill, wearing blackface. Look at the crop of woke comics, whether it's Stern or Jimmy Kimmel, his BFF, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, Michael Ian Black. What do they all have in common? They wore blackface. And then they went woke. It's not a chicken or egg thing there. You know what order it came.
Then Greg passed the spotlight to Megyn Kelly, and the tone instantly shifted. If Greg was the comic firecracker, Megyn was the surgeon with the scalpel, and her eyes were fixed firmly on Howard Stern. She began with calm precision, saying Stern's fall wasn't shocking, it was inevitable. Rebellion without principle, she declared, always ends in compromise. The words landed like a verdict, slicing through Stern's carefully preserved image. Megyn didn't stop there. She made it clear Stern wasn't brave, he was loud. And once the ratings no longer demanded outrage, the outrage vanished overnight. What people saw as growth, she explained, was really just survival. She exposed Stern's so-called evolution for what it really was, not wisdom, not maturity, but a desperate attempt to cling to relevance by becoming acceptable to elites. He traded the loyalty of his audience for the applause of Hollywood. And with a piercing final line, Megyn explained the tragedy. The old Stern built the empire, but the new Stern is just renting the penthouse. He's not the rebel he once claimed to be. He's just another insider guarding his status. Greg didn't waste time reminding everyone of the Howard Stern who once shocked the world, that Howard mocked politicians, skewered celebrities, and laughed in the face of political correctness with no apologies. Greg painted the transformation like a comedy sketch gone wrong. Howard Stern now, he said, is like a punk rocker who traded his guitar for a spa robe in the Hamptons. The audience howled, because the image wasn't just funny, it was frighteningly accurate. Once upon a time, Stern made soccer moms blush and regulators lose sleep.
There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now, I mean, as America, land of the free, Home of the Brave, I think it's literally on the line.
I agree with you.
And when I see them, how did you react to the Saturday Night Live bit?
Here's Stern on anyone daring to poke a little fun at Kamala.
Even when I watch them on Saturday Night Live with the where they have Maya Rudolph playing you, I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of.
Oh my God.
There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now. I mean, as America, land of the free, home of the brave, I think it's literally on the line.
So a guy who's supposed to be funny for a living now claims her candidacy is too important to joke about.
Now he sits in a studio sipping green juice, apologizing for the very jokes that once built his empire. It's not growth, it's retreat. Greg reminded the crowd that Stern didn't just sell out, he auctioned off his throne. He sold the booth, the microphone, the headphones, and as Greg joked, threw in his spine as a bonus. The room shook with laughter, but behind the humor was a brutal truth. The old Stern was a wrecking ball smashing sacred cows. The new Stern is a timid performer, carefully choreographed like an interpretive dancer, waiting for approval from his Hollywood friends. What a collapse from king to court jester. Greg turned the knife deeper, mocking Stern's archives. Those old tapes are filled with content so wild they'd make today's Howard crawl under his own desk. The hypocrisy of preaching wokeness while sitting on that mountain of chaos is simply staggering. Greg even called out Stern's friends in the hypocrisy circle, Jimmy Kimmel, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, pointing out how they too wore blackface in their pasts but now parade around as morality police. The hypocrisy wasn't hidden. It was on display for all to see. For decades, Stern bragged about being the outsider, the unfiltered truth-teller. But once he cashed in his fortune and secured his seat among the elite, he stopped fighting the establishment and started serving it. That wasn't evolution. It was surrender. The man who once staged outrageous stunts now spends his days whispering into the microphone like a life coach for celebrities.
Well, I just saw it, actually, and it was funny. I am a huge fan of Maya Rudolph's. I think she put a lot of time into doing the piece and the character.
Okay, so I do think it's interesting. He's very scared. A lot of Democrats, I hear this from a lot of my Democrat friends. They're scared of Trump winning again. They're scared of Trump.
Nothing in Stern's previous career that could withstand this modern witch hunt that he now embraces. So this is a form of restitution. Maybe he says, if I'm woke too, the crocodile will eat me last, but they always do eat. But I get it. He flipped from populist to elitist because now he's with elitists. He's living in the Hamptons. What would the Stern of now think of the Stern of before?
Greg joked that it's not even radio anymore. It's a therapy circle with better lighting. Then came one of Greg's most savage lines. He described Stern's studio as a haunted mansion of relevance, dim, gloomy, and filled with a voice that sounds less rebellious rebel and more like a luxury car commercial. The crowd laughed, but the image stung. Greg said Stern didn't age. He faded. He didn't transform. He disappeared. The firebrand, who once made headlines, is now a wax statue being dusted off for nostalgia tours. The most shocking part, Greg continued, isn't even Stern's content. It's that people who remember his 1990s persona can still stomach today's watered-down version without bursting into flames from embarrassment. The so-called king of all media, Greg said, now spends more time lamenting social norms than challenging them. The rebel has become the preacher, and the irony is almost too much to bear. Then Greg handed the stage to Megyn Kelly, and everything shifted. If Greg was the flamethrower, Megyn was the scalpel, slicing clean through Stern's carefully crafted image. Megyn didn't laugh. She delivered judgment. Stern's fall from rebel to relic, she said, wasn't surprising. It was inevitable. Rebellion without principle, she declared, always ends in compromise. And Howard Stern proved it. She made it clear. Howard was never brave. He was just loud. There's a difference. And once the ratings stopped rewarding outrage, his outrage vanished like smoke. Stern's so-called evolution wasn't maturity, Megyn said. It was survival. He changed not because he grew, but because he wanted to keep his seat at the table of elites who once mocked him.
Now remember, Stern used to throw bologna slices at strippers' butts. With accuracy, I might add. Now he's worried the possible leader of the free world can't handle his verbal foot rub. I wonder if he used to get this nervous for the strippers before he'd spank them on their bare asses with a dead fish. Okay, I hope you had a good week. I did, and no thanks to Howard Stern. True, the New York Post reported that Stern hit a chic restaurant in NYC with a crew of A-listers, including Jimmy Kimmel, Jennifer Aniston, Jon Hamm, Justin Theroux, Jason Bateman. I was not invited. I guess because my first name doesn't begin with the letter J.
The old Stern mocked conformity. The new Stern sells it podcast style, wrapped in whispers and fake enlightenment. Megyn sliced his rebrand wide open, and the truth spilled out. With pinpoint precision, she explained that the audience never asked for a sensitive Howard Stern who lectures about feelings. They wanted the truth teller, the edge, the unapologetic voice he once was. Instead, they got a hollow version begging for acceptance. And then came her sharpest strike yet. Megyn said the old Stern built the empire, but the new Stern is just renting the penthouse. He's not the rebel who built the legend. He's just the tenant living off its name. Megyn wasn't done. She turned her gaze straight at Stern's new moral compass. The man who once thrived on chaos now scolds others for being offensive, as if we're all supposed to forget the mountain of shock radio carnage he left behind. That wasn't redemption. It was revisionism. The old Stern ran toward controversy like a moth to a flame. The new Stern runs from it like a man dodging a bad Yelp review. That's not rebellion, it's cowardice. Greg jumped back in for one final round, smirking as he delivered another brutal jab. He said Stern is like a comedian who forgot the punchline but still insists on telling the joke, leaving everyone wondering why they're still listening. He painted a picture of Stern's future show, less of a talk show, more of a retirement home radio hour where guests sit in bathrobes, sip tea, and whisper about their feelings while forgetting they once mattered. The audience roared at the image. Greg mocked how Stern, who once blasted hypocrisy, now spends entire segments recounting therapy sessions and spiritual breakthroughs.
Howard's simply redefining masculinity. And why is it always the male lefties who are so desperate to get rid of masculinity entirely? It's guilt and self-preservation. Because scrape beneath the surface of any liberal male, and what do you find? A creep, terrified of his priggish past. Piggish past, I mean, not priggish. What is priggish?
It's not a radio show anymore, Greg laughed. It's an audiobook nobody asked for, narrated by a man desperate for Twitter approval. Megyn stepped in again, calm and ruthless. She said Stern's tragedy isn't that he changed, it's that he betrayed himself. He didn't trade rebellion for wisdom. He traded rebellion for permission. That wasn't evolution. It was collapse. She made it clear. Stern didn't become enlightened. He became compliant. He stopped questioning power and started agreeing with it, not because he believed in it, but because he was terrified of being left behind. That was the true betrayal. Megyn said Stern doesn't need to apologize for growing older, but pretending his past never happened while rewriting history as a redemption story. That's not honesty, that's cowardice. And for a man who built his brand on honesty, that's the cruelest cut of all. Greg nodded, delivering one final blow. He said Stern remodeled the House of Rebellion he once built, replaced all the walls with mirrors, and now spends his days admiring his own reflection. That's not rebellion. That's delusion. He summed it up perfectly. Stern didn't just leave the building, he turned it into a shrine to himself. The provocateur became the pleaser.
Right after the Columbine massacre that the killers should have raped the students before killing them. Not that I like that, Stern, but this pendulum swing from saying the most tasteless thing in the universe to putting your balls in a Tic Tac container. You gotta wonder what's going on here. It's striking that the king of the most misogynistic humor ever now turns into a breathless over a progressive, hopelessly shallow candidate.
The rebel became the echo, and the king of all media became the duke of disclaimers. Greg declared that Stern's audience hasn't abandoned him because of age. It's because silence is louder than any scream he can muster now. When rebellion becomes compliance, the crowd doesn't crumble, it just stops listening. The silence is Stern's new legacy, louder than the chaos he once created, louder than the scandals he once sparked, and louder than any apology he now whispers into the microphone. Megyn closed the demolition with icy precision. She said Stern didn't grow into wisdom. He shrank into fear. He didn't transform into a leader. He folded into comfort. And in doing so, he turned himself from a legend into a cautionary tale. The rebel who once tore down walls now builds fences around his own privilege. The man who once defied the mob now begs to be included in it. And that, Megyn declared, is the greatest tragedy of all. Together, Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly left no doubt. Howard Stern's fall from grace wasn't just exposed, it was incinerated. And as the cameras cut, Stern's carefully preserved myth lay in ashes, while his critics stood victorious on live TV.